February 12th, 1809, and Darwin Day is now an international celebration honoring both Darwin's contributions to science as well as scientific principles in general. This is a service that we've done here for many years, and it's usually been presented by our Freethinkers group. And today our speaker is Frank Carl. He has a doctorate in biochemistry, and he was former professor of urology, psychiatry, medicine, and cell and molecular biology at the Medical College of Georgia. So now we'll begin with our opening hymn by David Netjes.
Good morning, all. We're starting a little bit early, so we apologize if anyone's late to the service. Our opening hymn is not in our hymn book today. It is imagined by John Lennon. It's often a popular song for Darwin Day, and we're very fortunate to have Patricia Childs leading us today. And so we invite you to join along with the words on the screen.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Now our announcements from Marcia Frank, our president-elect.
Good morning, everyone, and a special good morning to our visitors. Coffee with the Minister for visitors will be conducted today via Zoom following the service. There'll be a Zoom link in the chat at the end of the service that you can use to access this informal discussion. The minutes from last week's mid-year congregational meeting are available in the Document Center on the UUCA website. Today at 5 o'clock, the Humanist Free Thought Group will be meeting, and you can contact Frank Carl. The UU Monday Meditation Group gathering will meet online on Monday, February 15th from 7 to 8:30. Contact Elizabeth McNabb or Melanie Roberts for information. Individuals who are interested in meeting in person in the church on Monday nights should get in touch with Chris Garcia and let him know as soon as possible by Sunday. He'll then meet you there on Monday at 7 o'clock. Chris will tune into the Zoom meeting that Melanie and Elizabeth are hosting elsewhere at the same time, and a hybrid meeting, part Zoom, part mask to mask, can take place. A reminder that a 14-person limit in the sanctuary is in force, and a face covering is required for entry into the church building. The selection for next Wednesday evening exploration group will be Grandma Gatewood's Walk, the inspiring story of the woman who saved the Appalachian Trail by Ben Montgomery. It won the 2014 National Outdoor Book Award for History Biography. The author is co-founder of the Auburn Chautauqua, a Southern Writers Collective, and was finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2010. There are copies available on the Pines Library System. We'll meet at 7 o'clock p.m. via Zoom on February 17th, which is Wednesday. For the Zoom link or more information, contact Jan Parsons. The monthly Board of Trustees meeting will be held online this Thursday at 6:30. The meeting is open to all church members. Please contact Alan George for information. The parents group will meet next Sunday, February 21st at 12:15 after the Sunday service. The Zoom link will be in your e-announcements. And the youth group for middle and high school youth will meet this evening and next Sunday evening. No, it's this evening, February 14th, from 6:30 to 8 o'clock via Zoom. Check your e-announcements for the web link. And our church remains in phase 3 of its reopening guidelines, which means of groups that less than 15 are allowed to meet. So you can please contact any member of the board or your church administrator if you wish to meet at the church. Thank you, and Jezebel, back to you.
Thank you, Marcia. And now let us enter into our time of worship. And today's chalice lighting words are our fifth source, humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Now is the time when we come together as a community to share our joys and sorrows. And here is Pat Lynch Hayes from our pastoral care team.
Now is the time in our service when we are invited to share the joys and sorrows that have recently come into our lives. We first remember those who cannot be with us today. We also remember those in military service and their families. Before I recognize those who wish to share individually, I wish to just express the heartfelt sorrows.
And now is our time of meditation. So I invite you to relax a little more, sit comfortably, feet on the ground. Take a few moments to allow your breathing to deepen, breathing all the way into your center. Let your spine be supported by your chair. Relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw, let your eyes soften. Allow yourself to be in a state of gentle relaxation. And according to science, or most scientific theories, I know all of them don't always agree, life began in the ocean, and that is also the source in many creation stories, not just the Christian one. but that mystery of the primordial waters whose ebb and flow began life is a beautiful metaphor. And I'd like your mind to think about that for a few moments. I don't know if you can hear what's happening in the sanctuary, but there's some lovely rain coming down on our roof, reminding us how the waters also nourish the soil. And it is this flowing waters that connect us. The waters that's flowing through our bodies, our blood, our tears. Water is associated with emotions, and I know many of us have been very saddened this week by the loss of Joey, by the loss of COVID and our own personal joys and sorrows. And it's Valentine's Day. That's a time of love. And water is associated with the emotions. Among the ancient Greeks, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, arose from the waters. So let us focus now on the ebb and flow of these primal waters as our own lives go through our own ebbs and flows of emotions, from our personal issues to world events. And our chime will take us in and out of silence, and we'll have a graphic of the water. And hopefully some of you can hear the rain in the sanctuary. So the waters of life flow through us, currents and tides of change. February is also Black History Month, and as part of our commitment to Black Lives Matter, we are inviting members of our congregation to read something to commemorate Black history. And today's reader is Desria C.
Good morning. My name is Desiree C., and I'll be sharing a poem written by Paul Lawrence Dunbar. It's titled, We Wear the Mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
Thank you, Desria. We are committed to our community, to growth, to change, to progress. And that comes in many ways. We want to maintain our buildings so that when this is over, we can come back. And from that, we need the flow of generosity from all of you to help sustain us in the work of this church. The link to donate will be posted, so please give as generously as you can. now here is Frank Harrell on the parallel lives of Darwin and Lincoln.
Good morning. I'd like to start with a quote from the Buddha that summarizes the philosophies of the two icons of Unitarian Universalism who were born on the same day, February 12th, 1809, 212 years ago as of Friday. Quote, believe nothing just because a so-called wise person said it. Believe nothing just because a belief is generally held. Believe nothing just because it is said in ancient books. Believe nothing just because it is said to be of divine origin. Believe nothing just because someone else believes it. Believe only what you yourself test and judge to be true. Unquote. These two icons are Charles Darwin, the father of evolution theory and organizer of biological science, and Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator and savior of the Union. Darwin was actually a Unitarian, at least for a while. Lincoln was closer to a modern day Unitarian Universalist than he was to his contemporary Unitarians or Universalists. It is important to note that they were influenced by the same period of history, given that they were born on the same day, even though they lived an ocean apart. However, they were born under very different circumstances, but developed very similar philosophies that guided their lives. Darwin was born into English aristocracy, free to pursue whatever path he chose. Lincoln was born on the rugged western edge of European expansion in North America, where by European standards, hard physical labor was required to convert wilderness into farmland. Lincoln's father moved his family repeatedly during Lincoln's youth, always to the Northwest, staying on the frontier, but moving out of competition from slave labor. Darwin's youth was spent in a constant environment on his father's estate with all the privileges of wealth. Darwin's Unitarian mother had an early influence in Darwin's religious education, but she died when he was 8 years old, leaving Darwin to his father's Anglican inclinations. Lincoln also lost his mother at the vulnerable age of 9, but on the frontier, a mate was necessary. So Lincoln's father quickly married again to a widow with 3 children, who became a good stepmother to the Lincoln children. Darwin received the classic education of an aristocrat, followed by an attempt to train as a physician, like his father. Unfortunately, he could not stand to watch the surgeries, so he never finished those studies. Then his father sent him to Cambridge to study for the ministry. He finished his studies, but never put them into practice. Fortunately, soon after his graduation from Cambridge, life changed for Darwin. He was offered a position on the HMS Beagle for an exploration trip around the world. As a child, he had developed an interest in science and saw the trip as a chance to study the native habitats of a variety of places. A planned 2-year excursion turned into a very productive 5-year study of various locations around the world, including the Galapagos Islands that Darwin made famous. Lincoln had a very different childhood. Both of Lincoln's parents were illiterate. And Lincoln himself only had about 12 months of formal education, but he was a voracious reader. Lincoln's stepmother encouraged his reading and had a small library. But Lincoln was largely self-educated with particular interests in politics, science, and religion. He mastered Euclidean geometry on his own to become a surveyor. He and his law partner established an extensive library at their law office in Springfield. And he is the only president to ever have held a patent. Lincoln developed a method for refloating grounded boats without moving the cargo after having to refloat a grounded barge that he and a friend were using to take cargo from Indiana to New Orleans. Lincoln made 2 such trips to New Orleans where he observed a slave market in progress. That led to his opposition to slavery, much like Darwin's extensive experience observing slavery in Brazil led to Darwin's opposition to slavery. It seems that both young men had a quick grasp of the unfairness of slavery. Darwin's religious affiliations were relatively complex. Like I said, his mother was a Unitarian and raised her children as Unitarian until her death when Darwin was 8. Then his father introduced him to the Anglican faith and to include his studies to enter the ministry. But Darwin was never really interested in religion. He was more interested in his beetle collection or his mother's pigeon breeding or in classifying barnacles than he was in religion. But he married a staunch Unitarian woman who also was his first cousin. But his respect for her and her beliefs and the beliefs of other religious people actually delayed the publication of his theory. From my readings of and about Darwin, I think that he was an agnostic with leanings toward deism. He definitely did not believe in a personal God. Lincoln, on the other hand, had very little association with any specific religious sect. His birth family and his stepmother were Baptists, but Lincoln himself never joined any church. Lincoln was very familiar with the Bible and quoted it often to bolster his legal or political positions, but his positions rarely dealt with religion. Lincoln was more interested in dealing with fairness and justice here and now than he was in some future reward, pretty much like modern UUs. As a politician, Lincoln could not be seen as too out of the mainstream, so he was circumspect about his actual beliefs. As best I can tell, he was probably a deist too. Darwin, even as a boy, was always interested in science, or natural philosophy as they called it back then. His interest in chemistry as a boy earned him the nickname Gas. When Darwin later in life looked back on his formal classical education, he considered it largely a waste of time. He believed that he learned more through independent reading and his scientific studies than from his formal education. Darwin learned early from his collecting of beetles and breeding of pigeons that taking good notes was important. He recorded all of his observations and kept detailed and orderly records of those observations. This was especially important on the HMS Beagle. That habit that he developed as a child led to his theory and his place in history. But science was Darwin's vocation. Lincoln's interest in science was more to understand how things work. For example, his invention to facilitate the flotation of grounded boats was based on scientific principles of buoyancy and balance. Lincoln was also interested in the controversy about the speciation of humans at the time. His political arch rival, Stephen Douglas, used the theory that the different races of humans were different species and that fact justified slavery. Lincoln was just as determined that all humans were a single species and that fact made slavery evil. The types of mankind theory promoted by Louis Agassiz, a prominent American scientist in the mid-19th century, stated that the different races of humans were actually different species and therefore had different capabilities. Darwin disagreed with that theory based on considerable evidence that Darwin had accumulated over the past nearly 3 decades, but had not yet published. Agassiz's theory was gaining acceptance in the absence of the contradictory evidence that Darwin had in his copious notes. Besides, Darwin discovered in 1856 that Alfred Russel Wallace was getting close to publishing his findings that were very close to those of Darwin. That double incentive put Darwin to work to write up his findings and publish them in a book that he called an abstract he titled On the Origin of Species. It first appeared in the fall of 1859 as Lincoln was organizing his run for the US presidency. It is unknown whether Lincoln ever read any parts of On the Origin of Species, but it is likely, given Lincoln's reading habits, that he at least read about Darwin's evidence during his run for the presidency. I am sure that Darwin's evidence reinforced Lincoln's position against slavery, but we have no hard evidence that it did. We do, however, have considerable evidence where Darwin stood on the issue of slavery. In a letter to Asa Gray, a friend and fellow scientist who was a professor at Harvard, Darwin wrote in May of 1861, a few months into the Civil War, and I quote, "Some few, and I am one, even wish to God, though at the loss of millions of lives, that the North would proclaim a crusade against slavery." Later in that same letter, he says, quote, "Great God, how I would like to see the greatest curse on earth, slavery, abolished." A year and a half later, Lincoln took a big step in that direction when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. While both Darwin and Lincoln spent their first 50 years preparing themselves for the great things that they would accomplish, neither Darwin nor Lincoln had accomplished those things by age 50, which they both reached in 1859. But their hard work was soon to pay off. Lincoln started his political career by winning a seat in the Illinois House of Representatives in 1834 at the age of 25. He served 3 more terms in the State House, then got elected to the US House of Representatives as a Whig, the political party Whig, in 1847. But he served only 1 term in Congress as his Whig party began to self-destruct. Lincoln then got involved in the organization of the Republican Party, which became the party against the extension of slavery into the Western territories, as opposed to the slavery-neutral Democrats. Lincoln made 2 bids for election to the US Senate in 1855 and again in 1859, but narrowly lost both times, the latter time to Stephen Douglas, his arch rival. Later in 1859, Darwin finally published some of his research On the Origin of Species to oppose Agassiz's theory and to make sure that he did not get scooped by Wallace. Up to that time, Darwin was hesitant to publish the conclusions that he had reached from the extensive research he had done over the past 3 decades, despite the encouragement from some of his scientific colleagues. He feared the public reaction to his conclusions. Indeed, he withheld the aspects of his research that pertained to humans from his On the Origin of Species publication because he did not want to generate public opposition to his findings. He was so concerned about what the public might think of his findings that he gave his wife, the staunch Christian Unitarian, veto power over his publication. At the same time that Darwin was publishing his abstract that would make him famous, Lincoln was ginning up his campaign for the presidency of the United States. In spite of being a one-term congressman and not serving in any national elected office for the past 10 years, Lincoln was actively campaigning for the new Republican Party's nomination for president. His work in organizing the Republican Party and his skills in oration carried him to the nomination. While Lincoln was adamantly anti-slavery, he accommodated the weaker anti-slavery extension platform of the Republican Party because that was the most progressive platform in the campaign that had any chance of winning. The others included the pro-slavery platform of the Southern Democrats, a platform ignoring slavery altogether proposed by the Constitution Union Party, and a platform allowing each state or territory to decide for themselves whether they wanted legal slavery proposed by the mainstream Democrats. That position of the Republican Party allowed Lincoln to garner about 39% of the popular vote, but a comfortable margin in the Electoral College. While the vehemently anti-slavery Liberty Party captured no electoral votes and precious little popular vote. And satisfyingly to Lincoln, Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's political arch rival, finished fourth of the four candidates receiving electoral votes. By that time, Lincoln knew how to position himself to get where he wanted to go. Indeed, by the 1864 election, he had not only signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but he was well on his way to getting the 13th Amendment ratified. And he was the first president since Andrew Jackson in 1832 to be re-elected to a second term. In the same vein, in 1859, Darwin finally presented his evidence to the scientific community to convince them that transmutation and natural selection were the drivers of biological differentiation. It took a while for the scientific community to accept Darwin's evidence, but by 1866, he had convinced most current scientists of the validity of his theory. So, the pictures that Stephen is now displaying are from the prime of each of these UU icons, Darwin in 1866 and Lincoln in 1863, shortly after he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Why were these two men who did so much to change their society respected in their time almost as much as they are today? I believe it was their method of pulling their society gently but firmly into their understanding of life. They used the gentle hand of persuasion to nurture others into a better understanding of the human condition. In spite of opposition along the way, they did not lose confidence in their concepts of fairness and justice and truth. And they were respectful even of their antagonists. They were men of integrity. As for the effects of Darwin and Lincoln on us today, I yield to a quote from James Lander, the author of the book, Lincoln and Darwin, Shared Visions of Race, Science, and Religion. Quote, "The continuing contest between design and natural selection has a quaint air of futility about it, but far more tragic consequences have attended the continued controversy over the degree of difference among the races of man," unquote. I recommend that in these times of bitter divisions, we continue to follow the leads of both Darwin and Lincoln to their logical conclusions. So be it.
Thank you, Frank, for those very wonderful words and much to think about there. Before we get to our closing hymn, I had said last week that I was going to play music by a different African American composer or musician every week to celebrate Black History Month. And our offertory this week was by Florence Price, who was extremely active as a composer and performer in the first half of the 20th century. She wrote everything from organ works to symphonies, and was pretty successful. And then her music went out of favor. And in the last 15 or 20 years, there's been a real Florence Price revival, and her works are now widely performed and recognized. And the piece that we heard at the offertory was a small piece that she had originally written for a church service. And now, our closing hymn is number 345, With Joy We Claim the Growing Light. And I'm happy to say that our very own Amanda Main will be leading us. And
With joy we claim the growing light, advancing thought and widening view, the larger freedom, clearer sight, which from the old unfold the new. With wider view come loftier goal, with fuller light, more good to see, with freedom truer, self-control, with knowledge deeper reverence be.
And so our closing words are by Carl Sagan. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are all made of star stuff. And though we extinguish our chalice now, let our light continue to shine brightly. Blessed be. Now, Spirit of life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the streams of compassion, blowing the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots only close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
our musical postlude is in honor of Valentine's Day. We will be probably playing the Carpenter song, Close to You.
you.